Should be recording. Fantastic, great. So yeah, and I would love to introduce Julia, who is the Executive Director of AVA International. Just a couple of sentences before I hand it over to Julia. Julia created the ProVeg New Food Conference, built up the first incubator for alternative protein startup in Europe, and worked on strategic planning, impact evaluation, and organizational development. In 2022, Julia became the executive director of AVA International, which is a new organization building an international conference series for animal and vegan advocates. Julia is passionate about language, culture, and art, and she loves to paint. She aspires to be a better cook someday and lives in San Francisco with her husband and their 2 sons. Welcome, Julia. Thanks so much for joining us. Just some very quick housekeeping. Feel free to submit questions via the chat anytime. I will get back to them if we have time. And during this chat, it's just going to be a moderated discussion of me asking Julia questions, and then we will take your questions at the end. Welcome again, Julia, and I would love to know a little bit more about your personal journey. How did you get started in event management, and what led you to your current role at AVA?
Yeah, thank you, Sophia. Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure. We at AVA are big fans of the Hive community, so thank you for putting together these little interviews and for having me today. Okay, how did I get started? So technically, I'm not an event manager. I studied sociology. Out of college, I had done a few jobs that were like event management like. I was a German teacher for a while, and then after that, my first job in the animal protection movement was at ProVeg. So I did a bunch of things for them, different kinds of roles. I also encourage everyone who starts working for an organization, just to try out different roles within the organization to find out, what your strengths are. I didn't have any clue. I just did whatever. And then at some point after a few years, I started working for a retailer on animal welfare campaigns. So I actually switched sides, which was a very interesting experience. But I wasn't happy there. I wanted to return the movement. And then that was around the time when AVA was created. And I was lucky enough to get asked. People asked me if I wanted to grow this into, a more international event. Back then it was meant to be this US centric and US focused summit. And me coming from Europe, I was always like, okay, we can't just do this in the US and just invite US activists. We need to do a global event and several events. And, I was super motivated to do the travel award system that I'm going to talk about later, maybe. And yeah, that's how it started. I just was lucky to know people who were working on AVA as a project. And then, I got hired.
Thank you so much for sharing. I really like the insights from here is that your journey to event management was through trying out different kinds of roles and maybe being at the right place at the right time, but at the same time you did try out different things and picked up skills along the way. So that seems like quite a nice insight. Thank you so much for also including the inclusivity. And this leads me to the next question of what are the key components of successfully managing a global event?
Yeah, I'd say there are probably three. I'd say the 3 top things at least are definitely good financial planning. You need to know your numbers. You have to have really good policies when it comes to decision making and be clear about them. In our case, we work with advisory committees for each of our events in each region that we have a conference in. And you have to have reliable partners on the ground who take care of the logistics. So logistics sounds always very boring. Like to me, it always sounded boring when I heard logistics. Oh, what's that? Like that's, I don't care about that. I want to do the fun stuff. That's what a lot of people think. But really, it's super important. Like you think it's nothing people will remember when they're at an event. Like, okay, nobody will remember the shuttle drive, like when you take a shuttle from the airport to the hotel. But if there is no shuttle, and if you have a terrible experience, if your, I don't know, credit card gets stolen and then you can't find the way and you don't have Wi-Fi and you don't, that's something people will remember. So don't underestimate logistics. That's what I would say as number 3. Yeah.
These are such great initial pillars, and thank you so much for sharing, Julia. I'm curious, did you know about these pillars from the start, or did you and your team discover them as you were running these events?
I think it's something that we needed to learn. I mean, we do work with, really great event managers who support us with it. Like, obviously I am more running the organization than like actually running the event on site. So there's always an experienced event manager on site with us. They usually bring 1 to 2 additional team members and, support us with all of those logistics. So like the contract negotiations, hotel, like I personally have never, worked with a large hotel and set up a conference for like close to 1,000 people. There needs to be really good contract negotiated beforehand. That happens 1 year before the event takes place. So there's a lot of things that I and the whole team needed to learn. Maybe when we talk about finances later, I can share some learnings that we had in the very first year of AVA. And yeah, I'm happy to go into details of our financial learnings when you the finance questions.
That sounds very interesting for sure. So would you recommend, just like a follow-up question, would you recommend that if you want to plan a really good event, you should get a professional on board who has experience with it?
I think it depends on the size of the event. Like if it's like a size that you can oversee yourself, like, maybe up to 100 or 200 people, there's a lot less risk involved, also in terms of costs. In terms of the amount of food and beverages you need and the liability with the hotel and, the fulfilling the contract. So I think it depends on the size. What we're doing for our first time events, like next year, for example, we're going to set up the first summit in the African continent. And that will be supported by a partner on site who is not an event manager in and of itself, but like the event will be much smaller. So for our US event, I would definitely recommend working with a professional. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks for the recommendation. You touched upon risk a little bit, so I'm curious to hear the role of risk management in event planning, especially considering the global scope of AVA's events.
Yeah, risk management plays a big role. We have a risk assessment plan that we do update every year. I mean, it's not something that we look at in every team meeting or, we have constantly on our mind, but it does exist because, people get sick. People have, passwords to certain folders that we need to know about. What happens if someone, drops out, or like, obviously we hope that's not going to happen, but so that's something that we have worked out. So we make sure to have backup plans before the event happens for things. But really, the truth is you can't always plan for everything, right? I'm going to give you a very concrete example. So the thing that you want to be least risky is the thing that costs you the most, right? So for us, what costs us the most when we set up a conference is the location, the event location, obviously. Actually followed by travel awards, by the way. So we spend a lot of money on travel awards. But that's a risk, that's more foreseeable because we can really change the number of awards easily and change the size. So we have more control. For the event location, and we spend, around $260,000 to $280,000 just on the location in the US. Around 130 to 150,000 for travel awards, just to give you an idea of the numbers. So hotels make their money not with renting out conference space, with the room rentals. They make money with the food and beverages. So we actually don't pay for the space. We just pay for how much people eat. Now, you would say, okay, you can just tell the hotel, okay, 800 people. But really, it's much more tricky because the hotel has a cut-off date. So they need to plan their, they prepare the food, they need to buy the food, they need to hire staff, service people, etc. So they have a cut-off date weeks before the event, and they want to know how many people are going to show up. Now, that's a delicate dance, right? So, okay, we know how many people have registered by then. Plus, we need to calculate how many people will probably register from now until the event, minus the people we think will not show up, because not everybody shows up, obviously. You said that in the beginning, 60 people signed up for this. How many are here? I don't know, 20, 25. You need to always keep in mind not everybody comes. Then you need to know, okay, how many people will eat during each meal? Not everybody has breakfast. How many people have breakfast on Friday? How many people have lunch on Saturday? It's a very concrete, and again, logistics, it's a very serious issue for us because that will determine hundreds of thousands of dollars at the end of the day. So that number is really important. And that's just something you can have a good estimate, but at the end of the day, you need to be flexible and see, with the hotel, okay, can we increase? How much do we want to increase? How much do we tell the hotel too? Honestly, we don't necessarily say the number that we think will actually show up and eat because we don't want to pay too much. So it's a dance. And yeah, that's part of our everyday risk management, so to speak. Yeah.
Wow, I tell you, I'm pretty impressed that you're able to pull it off all the time because it sounds very complicated. And thanks so much for providing the numbers. I feel like when you see the numbers, you truly appreciate just how expensive it is to put such an event together and how precious the events are because they're so expensive. So I'm also curious if you can touch upon any other risks that you have come across during event planning, anything else apart from the food and the location.
Yeah, I mean, there's always, obviously in the first year, 2022, there was still a lot of COVID risk going on. It still is. It's not over, COVID still exists. So there's definitely always a risk of, someone getting sick, a mini outbreak, at an event. We've had speakers canceling last minute, because they got sick. We've had people in their hotel room, even speakers, throughout the whole event, and they couldn't leave their room and, come down to do their talk because they tested positively. So that's always an issue. There's always so-called no-shows, so people who don't show up, sponsors, speakers, exhibitors. You need to figure out a plan on the go. So yeah, those are always risks that we need to deal with. But again, I think the risk that we are most worried about is related to the location cost, just because that's the biggest sum in our budget, and we need to be most careful about that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for elaborating, Julia. I would like to move on to managing a team that hosts events all year, because you host like so many conferences, I think 3 a year at this point, and like next year you're adding Africa as well. And it seems like the moment your team finishes one conference, they're like, oh yeah, we're already doing the other conference. I'm like, oh my gosh, like you folks are so hardworking. So because you are the executive director and you get to manage the team, could you share what it's like, and especially what's different about it in comparison to, for example, a campaign-based organization?
Sure, yeah. So it's actually, so this year what the team, mostly the team is doing is we're actually working on events in parallel for the first time. So right now, obviously next week, super excited for Asia Farm Animal Day, which is our event in Asia. But then in this early December, Latin America is coming up. So our team is already like completely focused on Latin America as well. So there's like two things going on in parallel at different stages, obviously. So you need to have good processes in place in terms of when do we open speaker application? Okay, this process is rolling. Then you do the travel awards in parallel, and then you have a cutoff date for the hotel, attendees, registration numbers. Then you need to assess the speakers. You have like different rounds with the steering committee or the advisory committee to do the program planning. Travel awards need to be, transmitted, and decisions need to be made. So all of those run in parallel. We have a really good Asana workflow going on for all of the events, so we don't get too overwhelmed. It's a lot of what event people call hurry up and wait. Like, the team has to be okay with working only a few hours a week sometimes, and then much more than 40 hours at other times. Right before the event, it's more than 40 hours. During the event, it's 24/7, right? And then after the event, usually there's like, okay, we all like take a deep breath, and not much is going on. There's also significant travel. Like, you have to think we have one conference every quarter next year on a different continent. So what we do, we usually stay at least a week, probably more like 10 days in each continent beforehand. So you can, if you think about it, that's a lot of like flexibility and travel involved for the team. And they have families, they have, dogs, they need to find dog sitters and so on. So I think something that's great, and that's also a big difference. You asked like a difference between event management and, campaigns or policy work. You really get to see the results of your work every quarter, basically, right? Every few months, you can see, okay, we've been working on this, and now it's happening. Like, and how do we like it? What worked out? What do we want to try next time? You can really do a lot of trials. Like, okay, we're going to do something totally differently this time. And then maybe next time, oh no, actually we're going back to plan A, like we did it the time before, And that is something that you can't do when you work on lobbying or policy or even like corporate outreach. You might actually never see what really happens to your work. And I think that's a lot of fun in event management, that you can see and experience it and live. And, a lot of people tell you at the event, oh, thank you so much, it's amazing, and they enjoy it, and you can see like what you worked for. That's really nice.
Wow, I love that. I wonder if you have any learnings from managing your team. I think it's been 2 years already. Like, what are some of the maybe top 3 things that you've learned?
Well, I think I'd say number one for sure is like you need to grow together as a team and learn together. And we really figured things out together. Like, it's not something that one of us just knew from the very beginning, and like now we just do what this person said. And that's, again, like, the more experience you gain through events and the more results you see, the better you can get. So yeah, and just being flexible, being positive, showing, like, that's the main thing on site, right? There are 100 fires that we're putting out in the background, or in the back of the house, so to speak. But the attendees shouldn't see those, right? It needs to be positive, optimistic, everything's going great, like, on stage. But then you need to have like a strong, positive team that works well together in those stressful moments backstage. Like, that's where the fires are. Yeah.
I really love that. I think actually one of the questions that people submitted is like, how do you handle crisis and last minute changes? Because I personally find that when I run events for Hype, actually at AVA conferences as well, I feel very stressed and like there's so much pressure. And like, I wonder, how do your team just get in this state where you're like very present? Like, do you have huddles, or do you have like a meditation every day? Like, I'm just very curious.
Yeah, so before the event, we sit down with the person that is our event planner or event manager for this event. So in the US, it's actually a professional event manager. And we have a very clear work division. So there's, our program lead is responsible for all the speakers, all the, like, usually she's in our main ballroom with the AV team, taking care of the flow of the moderators. We have a communications person. Obviously, she's doing something totally different, just social media communications. We have a person only dedicated for exhibitors and sponsors. And then there's the registration team. Like, there's a clear division with like work packages for each team each day. So we really have a plan that says, okay, 7 a.m., 7:30, 8:30, like, what is going on every day for every single person. Additionally, we always have floaters, so people who are ready to do anything. In case of a crisis, we obviously communicate immediately, group chat, calls. We are good at taking fast decisions at this point, and really are like, okay, let's just do this, and then go with it and stick to your plan. Again, it's important to stay calm. Never, ever show the attendees or let the attendees feeling like things are going wrong. A concrete example, maybe some of you were at the event in DC, our big summit in DC this year in May. So you probably noticed our swag bags were a bit different than the ones we had before. They had like a little paper, like a paper ground, right? Taylor's here. Hi, Taylor. So when we opened them up, we didn't plan for this. When we opened them up, we were like, oh my God, this is not what we ordered. We had like 500 of these bags, all paid already. They had like a weird paper ground, and I was like, oh my God, this is like not what we wanted. But then, okay, someone at the team had the great idea. Okay, hey, let's turn this into this really cool perk. Like, let's act as if everything is intentional. People can write their names on this little paper and like personalize the swag bag. So everybody's like, oh, that's so cool. What a great idea. Oh, that's, something different. Like, not the same swag bag as last year. And we were like, yeah, isn't it? It's so great. But really, it wasn't planned at all. And it's just about, turning it into something positive and just playing along, basically.
Wow, I'm actually pretty impressed, because I thought it was intentional and I didn't get one. And when I saw them, I was like, oh, I want one. They look so cool. So yeah, great job, Julia. And I think that's a really good reminder for all of us who do things like this. Like, when something happens, which seems like a failure or maybe something unplanned, like, is there a way of making it seem like it was supposed to be this way, which makes it even more special. So I appreciate that. It seems like our attendees are very interested in two topics: budgeting and impact evaluation. So I'm going to, even though I'm really interested to keep talking to you about how you manage events. I would love to talk about these topics. So maybe we could cover the budgeting first because you wanted to share more. So like the first question I have is like, how do you approach budgeting for large events?
Yeah, so I touched on this a little bit earlier, and I'm going to be really honest with you. Like in the first year in 2022, we spent a lot more money than we had, and we didn't know when we were spending it because on site, it's too late. Like you can't change anything. We were super generous, and we wanted to be super generous. We gave out a lot of free tickets. We paid so much more extra for like the special food. Like we wanted the food to be really good. We wanted to, invite all these influencers and gave out so many travel awards. And so when I say a lot of money, I mean six figures more than we had. We did not fundraise this. We were like in the red. So, and we learned after the event, right? When we got the bills, like, and that's when I started to become, I don't want to say I was scared, but I became very careful. And that really was a huge learning because, and again, we needed to be very generous. We needed this first event to be really extra amazing and extra great because it was the first time and people needed to know, oh, this is going to be like the next big conference that like, I want to go to every year. And like, so it's not that I wouldn't say we regret doing it, but we certainly had a lot of learnings for the finances. So now the way I personally do it for budgeting, for strategic like financial planning is I build on, of course, what we spend last year or last event. So we have those numbers, always starting with the largest expenses, always adding at least 10% on everything for price increases and inflation and buffer. And then as I go, I keep updating the budget spreadsheet, which is not what operations people would do or tell you to do. Like my great operations manager, Aniha, shout out to her. She always says, don't touch the budget, like leave the budget. And then, the next year you can see, oh, what did you think you were going to spend? Like that's the idea of a budget. But for me personally, I always go back and I play around with the numbers, and like I'd much rather update it because I'm so careful and like a little scared of missing something out, missing a number, that I always like I want to work with the actual numbers and not with estimates, right? Whenever I can. That's also why I fundraise all year long, like not just at the end of the year, but I always talk to funders and always try to get more money. So yeah, but maybe we'll go into fundraising. Maybe you have a question on fundraising as well. So I'll stop talking for now.
Oh no, please keep talking because the next question is about fundraising. Like how do you secure funding and sponsorships for these events?
Yeah, okay. So I mean it's always tricky, right? On the one hand, donors want to see what you're doing. And on the other hand, you can't do anything without already having money. So what I learned is sometimes you have to like talk things into existence, if that makes sense in English. Like you just keep telling people about your plan. For example, I kept talking about like, oh, we're setting up this conference in Africa next year, and I talked to all these groups in Africa and they wanted to know more and they talked to me and all of a sudden it's a thing and like it's happening. Nothing, no money was spent, nothing actually happened, but like the fact that you keep talking about it and and then people come to you and approach you and have questions and all of a sudden it's actually happening and now you have to do it and now people will fund it. That's like my experience. So for us, about half of our budget comes from philanthropic donors, and then 1/4 is NGO sponsorships, and the fourth part, the other quarter, is from ticket sales. All of our donors are FAF members, almost all of them, 99%. We don't do small donor fundraising, although that's something I want to look into in the future, but I haven't done this so far. So what that means is that all of our donors are at the event, which that's a huge benefit for us compared to other organizations or projects, right? So funders see what we're doing and they benefit from it. So the argument is really simple. Like, you see how great this is. You want this to exist, right? Because you get to meet all of your grantees here, and like, so you need to give us money. So that's I realize that's a really privileged situation that we're in, because yeah, it's so visible. So for sponsorships, it's a bit different. Like, it's funny, a lot of people think, why are you taking money from nonprofit organizations in our movement, right? Because, you know, they're wondering, like, wouldn't you want to support them, and like, why are you asking them for money for a sponsorship? But really, it's a win-win. It usually really is a win for the groups as well. So we give out really attractive perks for sponsoring, like a certain amount of free tickets, exhibit tables, a moderation slot, or, you know, social media promotion. And so the way I think about it is, if an organization in our movement wants to become a sponsor, it means it's worth it for them. They don't have to do that, right? They don't have to buy the sponsorship package, but they do, because the bottom line is it's worth it. And that's why, you know, we don't feel bad for doing that, because it's just a, you know, it's a contract, it's a deal, it's like win-win situation.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you covered that. And thank you so much for all the transparency with numbers and your reasoning. That's very much appreciated. So I have one last question about budgeting, and then I'll move on to the audience's questions, because it seems like a few of you have asked questions. Thank you so much for that. So I'm curious, how do you balance financial constraints with the need to create impactful and high quality events? Because, you know, we're very funding constrained movement, and everyone sometimes just wants to be scrappy, but then everyone also wants really nice food and really nice hotel. So like, I wonder, how do you actually strike this balance? And maybe you can give us some examples as well.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So we always make sure we have some aspects in event planning that we can tweak and like scale down if needed, right? So for example, we could reduce the number of talks in 1 year. We could offer less fancy meals. We could have less signage on site. We don't want to do any of that, but we could, without losing significant impact for animals, right? For example, we could also reduce the number of travel awards that we give out, but that would definitely reduce the amount of positive impact that we have. And, you know, that's what we're trying to create. So we try not to do that. But it's possible. So if we really constrained in 1 year, you know, we see, okay, we need to change something, like we would need to reduce the amount or the size of the travel awards. We're also trying to build a buffer to become more resilient as an organization. But as all of you know, this is really hard. Every organization in the movement is struggling with that, and so are we. We really are like back to zero basically after each event, and only slowly now, you know, we're able to grow the team a little bit and keep a little buffer that we carry with us. And that's the goal, like to kind of grow that buffer. But yeah, it's tricky. We try to save money on the things that are not important for the impact that we will have on animals. and not make compromises on the things that we believe are most impactful.
Thank you. Yeah, that totally makes sense. So I would like to move on to the audience's questions, and I can see that Parker and Carol, you also asked these questions along the impact. So maybe a first general question, like how do you evaluate the impact of your events and how do you optimize them for impact?
Yeah, so one thing about working in events is that you have to be comfortable with not having a direct impact for animals in our case, right? Like it's a very meta job, which is something I personally enjoy and I like, but it's like you have to be okay with just facilitating and making room for people who are there to thrive and make connections and improve and ideally increase their impact. Basically what Hive is doing as well, so you can probably relate. So that's number one, right? You're in the background, and you're just like giving the platform for others to increase their impact for animals. But obviously, there are certain things that we're doing and measuring in order to make sure we're on the right track. So attendee numbers, how many. By the way, we're not necessarily looking to maximize attendee numbers. So we would rather have 800 or 900 like movers and shakers, quote unquote, at the event who really strategize together and not have 1,500 or 2,000 people who, like, at that point it might become like closer to a veg fest, which is amazing. I love veg fests, but it's a different kind of event, right? So you need to make sure, like, what type of audience are you looking for? And that's just not the type of audience that we are looking for. Like, that's a different gap. So attendee numbers, obviously we do a head count in each talk, which talks get the best ratings in our survey. In general, the survey, what type of feedback do we get from attendees? What type of feedback do we get from the speakers? Is it worth for people to exhibit? Like, what do they report us? As you know, we set up the first Grantees Day in AVA DC this year, which is basically a way to make grantee and funder meetings more effective, or more efficient, I should say. So like we organize a matchmaking tool and organize these meetings between funders and grantees for one day. And we got a lot of feedback from groups participating and funders about how to improve that. So, one important feedback is like, do these groups actually get funding afterwards or not? Is it worth it for them? And if it's not worth it, then we're not going to do it again next year. And luckily, a lot of groups got most of their funding through Grantees Day, which is amazing. So that's again, a concrete example of like something that we measure and then think about our future programs.
Wow, I love it. That's very impressive, especially considering how hard funding is. It's especially for like a neglected regions group to come to AVA and meet their funding goal. It just seems life-changing. So thank you for sharing. So Parker also asked about job placements and testimonials that you get, because I guess that if you are funded by farm animal funders, maybe some of them are also EA funders, I guess they'll be very interested in like the very final outcomes. So funding could be one of them, but I wonder if jobs is also something that you track.
That's actually a really interesting aspect so the answer is no, we don't track that yet. So you mean how many people are getting a new or a different job through AVA, basically, because they met someone at the conference? Or Okay. Interesting. No, we don't track that. We do ask questions about your job and your situation in the survey, but I don't think we have a lot of knowledge about how many people changed. Um, there is one quote that I really like by Joey from former Charity Entrepreneurship, and now they're called AIM. And they actually found someone to work for their team now at the first AVA summit. So he came back to us because he knows, oh, this is the kind of impact that groups are looking for. So he told me, he was like, oh, by the way, we found this great person. I would have never met them if I hadn't been at the AVA summit. So that's one example that I have, but I'm sure there are more. And you're right, we probably should ask that and track that. Yeah.
Wow, this sounds so relatable. It's like you're talking about a hive, because people also sometimes they tell us, but sometimes, like most of the time, like why would you, right? Like if you got a job, you're just so happy. So yeah, if you got a job, or in the future if you get a job, tell Ava, and also tell Hive, because that's important. But yeah, that's the challenges of meta work for sure. So one of the other questions that people asked is how did you actually gather the team that you needed for events?
Yeah, so I think something that okay, again, I'm going to be super honest. I love ProVeg. As you know, this was my first job in the movement. ProVeg is doing amazing work. If anybody here is working for ProVeg currently, thumbs up. And also, ProVeg grew really, really fast. And they were pretty overwhelmed at times with this fast growth. And that is something that I remembered. And I was like, okay, if ever I lead an organization or build an organization, I'm going to make sure to grow slowly and sustainably, and to only really hire someone if there's a real need, if like it makes a lot of sense on a personal level, on a professional level, and not just grow for the sake of it growing. Not that ProVeg did that. Again, they're amazing, they're huge, they're doing great stuff, but it's challenging, like it's difficult, and at one point you're overwhelmed. So growing slowly and very intentionally, and hiring is super hard too. Like everybody who has hired in here knows, like it's difficult. Like you need to make sure it's a good fit. So yeah, we started basically, as a team of first 2-3 people who did everything, and then slowly, so the first person we hired on top of this was Amy, our communications person. So she kind of took a lot of work from our place, and then like the more people come to the team, the more specific the jobs get, and you can focus more and you can get better. And now we're a team of, let's see, 5. So it's 4 full-time people, and then there's me, also a full-time, but I don't count myself as like a full team member necessarily, because I'm not really working for the events that much. I'm just like doing the background work. And then there's an operations manager in part-time, and then we have like all these people on the ground. They're like contractors, part-time contractors. So overall, it's now probably like 10-12 people involved in AVA, but the core team is still really small, and I think that's a good thing. Yeah, just sharing some thoughts. I don't know if that actually answered your question. I kind of went off, but
No, I think that this is a really good answer, especially the lesson about keeping the team small. I mean, that's something that I'm trying to do for Hive as well. And like, if you are growing, do it slowly and thoughtfully. So a question that Parker asked is also kind of related to this. So when you were hiring these people, what kind of skills were you looking for? Because Parker is asking, like, what are the most in demand, what experiences are most in demand for event planning in the animal protection space, such as corporate conference planning or hospitality industry, or like something else?
So the answer I'm going to give you might be frustrating for a lot of you, but for us, I think it's true. When we hire someone, and we recently hired a new partnerships lead, for example, um, we look for someone who has a lot of movement knowledge, and that comes with experience. And that's always a frustrating answer when you're looking for a job, because how are you going to get experience if you're not getting hired? And I totally get that, because I have been there. Like it was the same for me. And I was like, well, like, give me a chance. Like, let me show you that I can do a good job, and so on. But now, being on the other side, in the other position, it's just the truth. Like, there is a huge difference between applicants and candidates. And if you can get someone who just has worked for 3, 4, 5 different organizations in the movement, and they know people, they know the politics of the movement, they know like the potential conflicts, it's great. And so that's the honest answer here. That's something that I look for, just movement knowledge and experience. You also asked about, okay, event specific experience like hospitality, and that I would say is great if you were looking to work for an event producing agency, for example, and become an event manager. I think that's something that you could totally do that without movement experience, or like, without specific vegan knowledge, or anything like that. You don't have to have worked for an NGO before to do that. And then maybe that's a great idea if you're interested in event management, to start working for like an agency. And there are a couple of agencies who do events in the movement, like all of the EAG global events, like those big conferences. They're planned with the help of agencies. We used to work with Amanda Kramer Events, who's doing exactly that, events in our movement. There is a couple of other, you probably know, the Vegan Women's Summit, like they have an agency they work with. And those are the places that I think you can start out and see if you like event management, and then also, kind of make your way into the movement. Yeah, I think that's the advice that I could give. Yeah.
I love it. Thank you so much. And I think that if any of you are wondering and you're looking for jobs and you're like, okay, how do I get this movement experience? Something I've recently realized, and actually in the chat with Amy, your comms lead, Julia, we discovered that I think that she was volunteering at first, and then she was hired. And I think this is actually, like, I keep hearing about it, because organizations at first don't have money, so they need volunteers. But when they are successful and they have money, of course, who do they hire first? Volunteers. And like, we have hired volunteers. And I think even if you don't get hired, volunteering is a really great way to show that you're committed to build this movement knowledge. So I wouldn't be afraid of volunteering, and just really lead into that, because paid roles, as Julia said, like, extremely hard to get, because you do need that movement knowledge and you need to like get in the role and start delivering. But anyway, that's my spiel for volunteering over. And I would just like to thank everyone for coming and just do a couple of concluding notes. So first of all, Julia, thank you so much. I especially appreciate that you're so transparent, open, and honest. I feel like everyone, like, I don't know, I just learned so much about AVA, so super appreciated it. So AVA has 2 upcoming conferences. One of them actually in the week sold out. Is it for the first time? That's crazy. In Asia, in Vietnam. And also there's an upcoming conference in December in Latin America. This is 5th to the 8th of December in Sao Paulo, which I heartily recommend you to attend. And you can register for these events using the links that you'll be sent after the event, and I think that you also sent during registering. If you want to learn more about AVA's events, please follow AVA on Instagram, where they also have a monthly newsletter. I'm just going to copy it here. And AVA is also on social media. That's how I get my AVA updates anyway, in LinkedIn. And also, we super appreciate that you attended, and what we would also appreciate if you could fill out our post-event survey. I will send it right after the event, but if you could just take a couple of minutes to let us know, was this useful? Did you enjoy it? Should we keep doing it? Should we stop doing these events? Yeah, because as us meta organizations, we really need these testimonials and events. So please, if you enjoyed or if you didn't enjoy, fill it out. And yeah, super appreciate all of you. And Julia, a big round of applause for all your work and for doing this event.
Thank you for having me, everyone. I'm going to stay a few minutes if, any more questions come up. Or thank you, Sophia, for organizing. Bye, everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I guess if people have any more questions, how can they reach out to you?
Yeah, sure. So email is always great, julia@avasummit.com. Obviously social media works fine as well, but email is just the fastest, I think. Feel free to, send any questions. Happy to get back to you.
Amazing. Cool. Well, thanks so much, all of you. Just a quick reminder of the ask to fill out the survey, and do consider attending AVA events if you haven't. I think that some of you have mentioned that you never attended an AVA event, and I know that it seems like a big investment because it's an expensive flight, an expensive hotel, but the experience is amazing, and what you get out of it obviously is what you also put in, but to me and my team has been absolutely worth it. So yeah, if you are like on the fence, take the plunge for sure.
Yeah, and maybe one little more, one aspect that I didn't mention, I actually wanted to tell you how much it is for us per person to pay, to pay for the food and beverage. And it's more than $450, close to $500. So the tickets, if you get an early bird ticket, that's like around 300, I think. It's really worth it. Like that covers, we actually lose money per person who gets an early bird ticket. So I shouldn't say this too loud, but now in the small group, I can say it. No, but really, I know it seems expensive. It looks expensive, but even just for the food, for the 3.5 days, like that covers it. And then obviously there's the talks, and there's much more than the food that, you get out of it. But people forget how expensive it really is to set these up. And if that's a little more, like one aspect to make you consider it and apply for a travel award. And we're trying to make it happen for a lot of people, but I know it's a lot. I know it's expensive. So
Cool. Well, I hope that more people will consider it, and thank you for being transparent about how much it costs, because I think after the session, I really hope people appreciate it a little bit more. Anyways, I'm going to be a good timekeeper and say thank you to all of you and Julia, and I'm going to share the recording if you joined us late in a couple of days so you can rewatch from the start. And thank you so much all for attending.
Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.